You are now about to witness
a man losing his mind.
Fear has a lot of different phases. It can be beneficial for you in preventing you from engaging with things that may be harmful for you. A spider might be scary in the first place because of how it looks, but what's really terrifying your brain about seeing a spider is the thought and the implications of what would happen to you health-wise if it were to bite you, and if it were to be a venomous spider. The same goes for things like heights, or deep waters, or tight spaces. Although none of these are directly threatening to you just sitting on the couch, our imagination is strong enough to bring us right into these certain scenarios and have us feel actual terror because of it. Fear can also be induced by irrational sources, like the fear of clowns or being scared of the dark.
Oh my God!
At least in places you're familiar with. Get the fear of dark if you're somewhere you've never been and you don't know the surroundings. But there is one phobia that renders all of these that I've just listed essentially obsolete, because none of these would be scary in any way whatsoever if it wasn't for the thing I'm about to discuss with you. Let me introduce you to apeirophobia. Perhaps the most mind-bending rabbit hole my life has ever revolved around. And I guess in that sense you could say I was a very weird child, because even at like 4, 5, 6 years old, instead of wondering about Pokemon cards and stuff like that, I already got deep into these existential questions revolving death and eternity and stuff like that. I became somewhat obsessed with trying to figure out what would happen after death. For whatever reason, I wondered about it, and even though it was on a much smaller scale than it would be now, because obviously I was a kid, I didn't know much about anything, it was still more than enough to give me more than just one panic attack over the years. As I got older, these got fewer and further between, because I just got occupied with other stuff. I had different interests, I got busy with things like school and hobbies. Up until around a year ago, where I finished high school, and I was essentially left with nothing again. I didn't have a plan, I didn't have anything, not even a hint of where I'd be going from now on. Didn't know what to do. I had all this time on my hands, but not a single next step I would be following. So that obviously made room for these existential thoughts to creep back in. But now, since I've gotten a lot smarter with a more developed brain, I at least wasn't able to terrify myself with them that much, and I could also come up with some more rational, although kind of outlandish conclusions about it. But now, what makes eternity as a concept so daunting and overwhelming to me? Well, for one, it's kind of inescapable, because if it does exist, then we're experiencing it right now. And if not, we're still essentially, because you can't really run from it. As long as there's something, and even if there's nothing, there will be eternity, either of something or of nothing. So it's kind of paradoxical in that sense, which already makes it confusing, but also makes it inescapable in a sense. So we would be somewhere on a timeline that has no beginning, or maybe it does, but it doesn't have an end. And if it doesn't have an end, why would it have a beginning? What was before the beginning? There would have to be something. Eternity stretches both into the future but also into the past, if it exists. And even if it doesn't exist, that makes it, you see what I mean. But either way, you could probably already see my main point. It's the fact that there's only two real options in this case. Either life is eternal, or death is eternal. Nothing in between, nothing beyond that. Two possibilities. And also life, by my definition, meaning consciousness, conscious experience, and death, lack thereof, and lack of existence as a concept. And when you look at both, there is no good option between these two, because both have very dark and very terrifying implications, at least in the way I used to think about them. I don't think I need to explain why eternal death or eternal loss of consciousness and loss of existence is kind of dark and a little existential. And to me at least, the argument of it's gonna feel like you're sleeping doesn't really hit. Because if death wasn't permanent, so you die and many billions of years later you wake up, I wouldn't see a problem with that, because since you're unconscious, time passes like that, and you just wake up again, either with memory of where you were before or no memory whatsoever, doesn't matter. But if death is permanent and dying means you just stop existing for the rest of eternity, I have a problem with that. I dispute. I refuse. And I feel like anyone who says they've come to terms with it, or have accepted it, or are fine with it, are either lying to themselves and coping, or they're just kind of pushing it away in a sense, which I would understand. That's what I do as well. But I like existing. It's kind of neat. I don't mind it. I'd like for it to go on. But thinking about the implications of eternal life and eternal consciousness does make that option just as terrifying to me. Eternal life or eternal consciousness is essentially what any theology or religion or spiritual belief tries to define, or at least depict a version of how that would look like. And the two main ones, which I'll discuss now because all the other ones are essentially just versions of these, are either heaven and hell, so like a theological approach with a God, an almighty being in charge of that, or reincarnation, which is more so found in Buddhist and general Eastern religions. In both, just as a main thing, which I think anyone knows, but I'll just cover it really quickly, it's the idea that your body is not you, in a sense, but it's just a vessel for a soul, like an undying spirit that is actually you, that is your conscious experience, your conscious thoughts. I realize how crazy I'm about to sound now, so please don't think I'm just some weird spiritual hippie. I try to approach things with a bit of a mix of both rationality but also hope. That just makes me feel a little more at peace with it. This video is not sponsored but by some kind of rock crystal healing stuff. It's not sponsored by anyone. So anyway, here goes my 2 cents on both of these versions. Starting off with heaven and hell. Heaven and hell, you already know it. It's just basically the good and a bad place where the good and the bad people go after they die, depending on how they live their life. I'm not going to be judging or examining the moral implications of sending someone into a pit of eternal and infinite suffering for like 80 years worth of sin, or even just one sin, like touching your homies inappropriately. That I might do in another video, but even focusing on heaven, which is supposed to be the good outcome, I think I need to put into perspective how long eternity actually is. Because, and look up like the typewriting ape, which was the inspiration for this analogy I'm about to give you. You would be able to play every individual move of chess, all the unfathomable amounts of different steps, in every order for any length of time, against every single possible opponent you could have, winning against each one of them and losing against each one of them, and having a draw against all of them an infinite amount of times on every single chess board you could possibly imagine, and still not have gotten past 0% of eternity. If it can happen, given an eternal time frame, it will happen. That's Murphy's Law. So taking it even further, every single subatomic particle, every string, or whatever you may believe in, be the smallest measurement or unit, Planck length, will be in every single different place in the entirety of the universe or the entirety of existence an infinite amount of times. Every single constellation will be eventually fulfilled. This sounds crazy, but I think if you can get behind what I mean, it should terrify you. Because even then, we would not have scratched a single percentage. We'd still be at 0% of the timeline completed. So that raises the idea that it's just boring if eternity was to be experienced consciously. Eventually, there would just not be something else to do. So then you'll repeat from start an infinite amount of times, and there will never be anything new to do, except for 2 possibilities. Either, and these are the ones that kind of carry my mental health, either there's an infinite amount of things to do, which means there's just as much time as there's things to do, and we'll never run out of stuff, so we'll never lose our minds because we've done and seen and heard and felt everything there is to feel an infinite amount of times. Or, because of the way our minds work, we only have a very thin slice, a perspective of a very thin slice on the timeline. So I personally forgot what I've eaten yesterday for lunch. That means you forget things. And eventually, when enough time has passed, it's gonna feel like doing it for the first time again. So essentially you will be doing the same things over and over again if consciousness is eternal, but it'll always feel like the first time, which isn't that bad. That's right, amnesia is carrying my mental health right now. And that's also the main point why I think the other version, reincarnation, might be the best possible outcome if it were to be real. Maybe it is, because they're the main idea, and some religions have different versions of that, but essentially you're just reincarnated into a different body with a different set of cognitive abilities, with a different set of memories or formation of memories. You don't have memory of your past lives, otherwise you would be remembering your past lives right now. So you'll never do everything there is possible to do in one lifetime, because that's simply never gonna happen. And that's essentially the most important point for me. As long as I'm aware that I'm conscious, I'm good. So that's what kind of helped me in that sense get rid of that existential dread. I just take a deep breath, I realize, oh, it doesn't really matter what's gonna happen in God knows how many years. I am conscious right now, so things are fine. I know this video sounds insane, it's very different from the other videos that I've made and the other topics I've covered, but it's really important to me. I truly do not want to disappear forever. Even if my form essentially, or like what you would ascribe to as myself, would be gone, I do not want my conscious experience to fade forever. To take a essentially very pseudoscientifical approach to why I think it's also the most likely version, or at least in some type of way a reincarnational process, assuming the universe works the way we assume it does. So it's just a bunch of particles floating around, and eventually, after God knows how many years, or scientists know how many years, all the energy will disperse and be spread out evenly, and eventually that will just be a new Big Bang, so the universe starts over again. Eventually, if this process happens enough times, you, who are also made of particles, of a certain set of particles, which are also arranged in a certain way, like they bond together in a certain way, giving you consciousness, assuming that's how it works, who is to say that eventually it will not again, they will not meet again and form a vessel like your body, something that allows for your personal conscious experience to get back into it, to express itself again. You might see it differently to that, which is totally fine. You can argue in the comments if you want to. But personally, and I know this does sound like cope, and it maybe is, I still think that consciousness and just personal experience is special and important enough to not just plop out of thin air, exist for 80 years or however long someone exists, and then vanish again for the rest of eternity. That just seems unlikely and unreasonable for me, because consciousness, if you see it that way, is the only thing that actually matters in the universe, because without conscious experience, nothing exists. And that's also kind of drifting into solipsism, which I'm not advocating for. I don't think I'm the only conscious being in the universe, although I could not prove to myself that I'm not. I don't think I am. That would be very arrogant, sort of the main character syndrome. But I think that would still be a very reasonable explanation for being selfish in a way, or egotistical in a way. Because even if you can sacrifice something of your own to help someone else, you don't really have anything from that other than the satisfaction of having helped someone else. This is drifting into very weird ethics. This is not what this video is about, but I would get it even though I don't agree with it. I wish you'd be able to look inside my brain, because I'm having trouble explaining the thoughts I am having and the thoughts I've had before. It's probably very convoluted and confusing, which I get. I'd get if you don't get what I'm saying, because not because it's so complicated or profound or special in any way, just because I'm not able to communicate it as efficiently as I'd like it to. But if you think the things I'm talking about are interesting, Please leave your thoughts in the comments. Maybe you can understand what I'm trying to say. Maybe you don't think I'm crazy, even though I myself think I am. At least when it comes to that topic, because I've obsessed with it ever since I was a small child, which is probably not the best possible thing for my development, but what are you gonna do about it? Going by that definition, also death itself would just be your particles being arranged in a certain way that no longer allows for you to be consciously experiencing anything. I'm pretty sure there was something I've heard that every cell in your body will be replaced within the time frame of 7 years. So 7 years from now, your body is gonna be consistent of entirely different cells, but it's still you, yourself, who is conscious in it. So when time passes, eventually particles will be arranged again to allow for your spirit to prevail again. So yeah, the human spirit will prevail. I've written this down. I think that sounds kind of cool. It sounds very anime, but in that sense, it's the thing that gives me hope. It's the thing that keeps me sane and that allows me to keep going. There's another video I've planned which kind of delves into the topic of why I don't think death in itself matters, with whatever may happen after it, as well as this phobia that I'm talking right now, a paraphobia, the fear of eternity, why that also doesn't really matter for you in the current moment. Other video. And as a final word, to explain again why I think this is the only thing that actually is potentially scary, eternity. Imagine a bear mauls you to death. It's only scary to you because you don't know what happens after death. So it could be over forever, which sucks. Which I personally don't believe, which I hope it's not. But it could be, it's a possibility. It's just a chance. Otherwise, if life is eternal and there's a finite things to do, your consciousness eventually will get insane, will get mad with boredom, even after your death. It also makes the bear mauling you scary because everything is scary then. Existence in itself is scary because you know eventually you're gonna have done everything there is to do and you lose your mind. And you will have lost your mind for the rest of eternity. But because so far, no one, or at least very few people, have lost their mind in that sense. I mean, who knows what happened? Who knows what lies in the past and what lies in the future? It doesn't really matter as long as the current moment works and as long as the proximate moments, so like the near future, is secured and conducive to good mental health. I think that's all that matters. And probably the more practical approach to getting over this existential fear is just to occupy yourself with other things. All of these thoughts stopped again once I got busy with other things. I started university. I got back into making videos. I never stopped training, but I got into more intense and more focused training. And other hobbies that I'm trying to follow, other interests that I'm occupying myself with, have left no space, have taken up all the room in my head that could be filled with existential dread and horror.
Just absorbs all the space.
Obviously some is still there because otherwise I wouldn't be making this video, but writing this script and narrating this video has given me nothing but more hope and more optimism for how reality is. But even if I'm wrong in it, there's no use in losing your mind over it because you're not going to be able to change it. God's plan.